Matthew Alan Kane. Welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel Albu.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to see you again.
Now, I had the pleasure of playing Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders with you and David Fox on stream a couple of months ago. So we got to talk about Zak for a bit. But today, I'd like us to deep dive into your entire career.
Wow. Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. What was your childhood like?
My childhood, oh my gosh, that's a little before my career. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and on a dude ranch. So my grandfather in the 1950s had started this dude ranch called Rancho del Rio. And I was born in 1960, and by then my dad had taken the managerial role of the ranch. And as the dude ranch business started fading in the mid-60s, he leveraged what we had going on there. There was a restaurant on the property that served the guests at the dude ranch. And he decided he was going to focus on the restaurant, brought in a very fancy French chef, which Tucson, Arizona had never seen anything like that, and opened a place called the Tack Room, which was the, without question, fanciest restaurant in Tucson. And so my childhood was sort of, I learned to ride horses before I could walk, and then grew up in this very gourmet restaurant world where escargot was my favorite food as a 3, 4, 5-year-old. And so that's sort of how it started. And I stayed in Tucson until I was 18, and then started my life in California. I not a lot to say about Tucson. My family's still there. I love going back to visit, but I've spent most of the rest of my life in California.
Okay. Now, out of all of your life's highlights that we're going to talk about in a moment, I think we can all agree that the real pinnacle has to be your photo with O.J. Simpson.
Oh my God. So I'm kind of embarrassed you brought that up. That's me and OJ at a Chevy dealer in Tucson in, I'm going to guess, I look like, 8 or 9? So 1968, something like that, 69. He had been the Heisman Trophy winner, and I don't know what year that was. This is prior to him embarrassing all of us. And I, stood behind him. I got his autograph. I was a big fan. I was a real football fan when I was a kid. Not so much anymore. But OJ was the guy. I mean, he was just amazing. And I'm very embarrassed you found that. But,
you look so happy.
I was happy. I was a really happy kid. I'm actually a pretty happy adult. I do not suffer from any form of depression. I always glass half full. And actually, the glass is almost always overflowing for me. It annoys some people, but I've learned to live with that. But yeah, hi, OJ. Sorry you went down the path you went.
So let's jump to July 4th, 1976, when you celebrated at Camp Horseshoe.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, my parents liked to send me away for the summer. They got rid of me for 2 months from the time I was 9 until this time when I'm 15. And it was actually wonderful because Tucson, Arizona is a desert. And we had very few trees, and they sent me to this beautiful lake in Minot, Wisconsin, and I spent my summers there, surrounded by boys, which was not my favorite people to hang out with. I tended to like girls better, but it was what I had. And it was 2 months of, going on canoe trips and backpacking trips and cleaning your cabin to perfection. And but it was great and it was a good experience. I still have some friends. The guy you zoomed in on, actually, I'm in touch with just behind me there, Peter Vick. He and I are still connected on LinkedIn, though we haven't seen each other probably since about a year after this. And I can remember the names of all these guys. So yeah, it was a huge
Send him
influence.
this photo. It
I
would be a
will.
great
I will.
icebreaker.
I will. I'll say, hey, Peter, how you doing? Yeah, it's amazing. I'm looking at this. I don't think I've looked at this photo for many years, but I remember all these people. Yeah, there's Mitch, who is the best fisher in the camp, and Bobby. Yeah, hello everybody, Jeff. Anyhow, strange to see you all again, especially in this context. I have a feeling this is going to be an interview full of surprises, Daniel, because I've so far been surprised twice.
So now that we've seen your childhood, how and when did you first get into music?
Oh, well, that actually started very early in my childhood. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been a studio pianist in the 1920s and 30s. And when I was born, she got it into her head that I was going to be a concert pianist, which was, I think, something she had always wanted to be. So beginning at about 3 years old, I started getting piano lessons. And it was pretty much the main focus of my free time from 3 until 9 or 10 years old, when I started realizing that other kids had more fun than I did, and I was just sitting in front of the piano all the time. And by the time I was 11, I had fully rebelled and swore I was never going to touch a piano again. And I actually didn't really for about 15 years. I backed out of music. I was pretty scarred from, being in a situation where it wasn't a choice and it was never fun. I finally got back into it in my 20s, strangely enough, at the same time I got into computers. I ran into, when I was in college at San Francisco State, they had a place called the Apple Orchard, and they had been donated a bunch of Apple IIs right after they had been released. And I started playing in there with the computers, and soon after I started, they got this synthesizer in there called the Sound Chaser, and it was plugged into the Apple, and you could do crazy stuff with it. And I got hooked, and that pulled me back into music. But that was many, many years later. Yeah, so that's how I got started, and now I play piano every single day. So it's a huge part of my life. I no longer play much classical, which was all I played then, and I tend to just do improvisation, which is, with friends come over and we make a lot of noise, and it's all joyful, and there are no wrong notes and nobody hitting my fingers with a ruler to keep them round, which was one of my memories from that.
And so in 1983, the year in which I was born, you founded Bomb the Tear Software, where you created Mozilla and designed Create-A-Tune. So
oh my gosh.
What led to your decision to develop software that combined music and technology?
Well, like I said, I ran into Apple and the Apple computers. They were eye-opening to me because at the time, I was studying art at San Francisco State and doing these sort of crazy conceptual art projects. Computers were just becoming a thing. And I had a professor there named Brian Rogers who tried to convince me that this was something he thought I'd be interested in. And I just did not see an intersection between computers and art at all. But I was one day at the downtown San Francisco Union Square Macy's, and I wandered into their basement where they had an Apple II. This was actually before I found the Apple Orchard at San Francisco State. And something about it was just fascinating. And I sat down at this thing and started typing, and immediately got the satisfaction of seeing syntax error come up on the screen over and over and over again. And like, wow, I can't figure this out. But next to it was this little manual, and I picked it up, and within about an hour, I had gotten it to draw a line across the screen, and I was hooked. Something clicked and was like, oh, this is cool. So I taught myself BASIC very quickly. I was lucky enough to have a grandfather who wanted to support me and bought me an Apple II and 2 disk drives and a monitor, which at that time it was a used system, and I think it cost near $5,000. This is 1980, 1979, 1980, and it was a huge amount of money. But I then just spent the next several years diving into it. The first thing I really got into was making noises with the beeps and boops of it. And I made this software called Create-A-Tune, which was a way that you could create little melodies and then use them in other software. And amazingly, I sold it to a game development company. Blew my mind. I mean, I just ran into somebody, told them about it. They're like, oh, we could use that at our company. And so they bought it. It was extremely simplistic, and it was written in BASIC. And somehow, I made my first money writing computer software. I soon after that realized that there were serious limitations to using BASIC to try to do anything interesting. So I taught myself assembly language. And what happened in Mozilla, which you mentioned, I was getting near, this is probably 1983, 84. I had been in college since 1978. I've been there a while. I think I'm in my 6th year now of going to undergrad, and still hadn't gotten close to a degree, and realized I needed to do something to get out of college. And my roommate at the time, David Lawrence, and I, we lived out in the avenues in San Francisco on 27th Avenue, not 13th like Zak does, but a few blocks away. And we came up with this idea to build Mozilla, which was, written all in assembly on an Apple II. And what it did is it allowed you, I don't want to get too geeky for those people who don't understand this stuff, but...
No, please do.
There was a synthesizer that had come out that year called the Roland Juno 106, and it was the first synthesizer that allowed what was called system exclusive messages. You could, through MIDI, which was this new protocol for controlling synthesizers, almost all people did with it was play notes. But the Juno came out and said, oh, you can control every aspect of the sound with MIDI. And I had bought a Juno, I had a DX7 and a drum machine, but the Juno was really fascinating. The sounds were beautiful, and this system exclusive thing was just fascinating. And it started us thinking is we could create a program where we could use the Apple II to in real time control the sound of the Juno. And so it created sort of this timbral synthesis. So it's not just that you create a sound and then play with it, but you could change the sound over time. And so Mozilla, what it was these 4 digital low-frequency oscillators. And you could set these 4 oscillators to control any parameter, like the frequency or the wave shape or the ADSR envelope, or anything could be controlled in real time. And it was, a labor of love. David and I, he did most of the interface. Oh, the other thing we did, this was 1984. It must have been end of 84. The Macintosh had just come out, and we were fascinated with it, but couldn't afford one, of course. So we recreated a full Macintosh interface on the Apple II with pull-down menus and pop-up windows and all these things that were just kind of amazing. Nobody had done that on the Apple II before. We also had this, the Macintosh had a mouse. We had a joystick we were using, and getting that cursor to move while doing everything else was actually one of the hardest things we had to do. But we create this program. It got reviewed by Keyboard Magazine with an amazing review. They called it a video game for synthesizer musicians. It really made cool sounds. I actually still have it all and set it up. You could create a single sound. You could write a whole Eno album with one note, because you could press a single note and it would change for over 300 days is the longest phases you could do. So it was pretty conceptual. But yeah, and that's actually, Mozilla is what led to David and I both being hired by Lucasfilm originally. And, they were pretty impressed with it. Apple was very impressed with it. They brought us down for interviews. Mozilla was the key to starting my career.
Wow. And still in 1984, you also joined the Bluebird School of Music and developed the curriculum for their first class on computer music and synthesizers. So how did you approach designing a program that combined, traditional music education with technologies that were still being developed? I mean, probably by the time you wrote the curriculum, everything was already obsolete.
It was it was moving very quickly. I actually made a friend, Steve Savage, who is the head of the Blue Bear School of Music at that point, and he suggested the class. He knew I was noodling around with all these synthesizers, and he'd seen Mozilla, and he wanted to bring this to the music school. And so he asked me, want to teach a class? And I'm like, okay. It was really more a theory class about what was possible with machines rather than focusing, because they were changing fast. The EMU emulator came out in that year, I believe. And so all of a sudden you have sampling, which was a whole new ballgame. I had a little sampling card that I used on my Apple II that would do like these 2-second samples I could record and use. And I used them in some of the music I was making at the time. But then the EMU came out and you had discs and you could store samples and you could play them on a keyboard and do all these cool things. But yeah, the class itself was interesting because I think I was at that time, 23, 24. Everybody taking the class was older than me, up into their 60s. And so it was a little intimidating. But it was also fascinating. People were really interested to learn what you could do with these machines. At the same time, I was also doing guest lectures at San Francisco State, which I had somehow graduated from, in several of their classes showing computer music. People were just fascinated with the idea that computers could be used for more than just, spreadsheets or crunching numbers. And so there was a lot of demand at that point to have people come in and say, oh, look, you can do cool stuff with them too. I mean, now we just take it for granted, but, mid 80s, it was a novelty. And I actually have a story. One of my first times lecturing in this classroom at San Francisco State about computer music, I brought in this sound chaser synthesizer I was talking about earlier, and I was talking to people about it, and I turned off the computer, took the cards out that controlled the sound chaser, because people had never seen what a computer card looked like or what chips looked like. And I passed that around the class, and then I'm showing something else on the computer. There's, 60, 70 people in the class in a big lecture room. The cards come back to me, and without thinking while I'm talking, I plug them back into the computer without turning it off, and the whole thing goes up in smoke. And this was, $3,000-$4,000 worth of equipment, which was a lot for me. And I watched it just burn and melt in front of an audience. And that might have been one of my top embarrassing moments. So luckily the school
reimbursed for
the school was kind enough to pitch in a couple $1,000s. It was amazing. And I was able to, with scraping together what I had, replace it. But that was my first computer. Gertrude was her name. And she never programmed again.
You taught them a very important lesson.
Yes, that's what I told them. Don't do this.
So when did you first hear that Lucasfilm Games was hiring?
Well, it's actually, that was David Lawrence. After we finished Mozilla, he actually reached out to them. I don't remember where he heard about it, but he sent them a copy of the program and reached out. And, I was kind of oblivious to it at that time. We were roommates and we were good friends, but he definitely was the go-getter there. I was not so worried about getting a job yet. I wasn't really thinking about it. I was recovering from having, almost 7 years of undergrad. Who has time to do anything else but just sleep after that? And he surprised me. I remember one day saying, we have an interview with Lucasfilm. And it was like, what? Because that was Star Wars, was pretty much all I knew about. I had no real sense of their games division at the time. I didn't really play, the kind of games they were making. what games I was playing there. Apple II games. There was one called Droll that I really liked. There was like very simple little platform shooter games, but just nothing like Lucasfilm was working on, which was pretty advanced. And I remember us going up for the interview, and it was before the games division was at Skywalker. They were in a place called Kerner in San Rafael. And we go up, and it was just this boring office buildings. And we had to do a demo of Modzilla in this room of, about a dozen people. And they were fascinated. It was amazing reception. They were very excited by what they saw. And they, told us, if we wanted it, we had a job. So it was easy, actually. It just like, okay, Modzilla worked. It also, by the way, I used Modzilla for all my final projects in college. So it served double duty. But the project they were hiring us for was a joint venture that Lucas had started with Apple Computer and the National Geographic Society. They had this thing that eventually was called GTV, which they were doing this. The idea was to replace film strips, which you're probably too young to remember. But when I was in elementary school, they didn't have movies in the classroom very often, but what they had were film strips. And there were these long 35 millimeter strips of single images that they'd play a soundtrack that would beep and the teacher would turn to the next picture. And oh my God, were they boring. So the hot technology at this time was video discs. And the idea was, well, you can store 50,000 still images on a video disc. Wow, that's a big film strip. Can we come up with a way for a computer to control that and reorganize and repurpose them with soundtracks and create all sorts of stories out of these still images and little bits of video footage and, make a teaching tool? And so that was the initial project that I worked on at Lucasfilm with David and I. Yeah, that was the only project actually we worked on together at Lucasfilm, even though we were both there for several years.
And were you a Star Wars fan at the time?
I mean, everybody was a Star Wars fan at the time. I wasn't a huge fan. I wasn't a super fan at all. What I remember though from going to Kerner, and I think this was when the timing, they had just released the Star Trek movie with the whales, and where you watch the Enterprise sinking into the bay, and that model, that full-size, life-size model of the Enterprise was on the lot where we were, and we took some pictures hanging around it. So that was cool. I'm not much of a fan guy. I appreciate, Star Wars, but I wasn't like in awe working at Lucasfilm because it was, I'm sitting next to, famous people at lunch at Skywalker and a little interested, but mostly I'm enjoying the really good lunches they served. So, I know that there was a lot of Starstruck stuff going on there, and I've always been a little oblivious to that.
Very well. Maybe it made you a better employee.
Maybe. Well, I mean, when we were working, and we'll get into Zak, I'm sure, but when we were working there, I mean, I didn't have much time for anything else. I was working pretty much noon until 2 a.m. every day. And so my focus, I got there by noon because that's when lunch was served, and I did not want to miss the lunch. They had the most amazing lunches when I was at Skywalker, because you were 45 minutes away from getting to any restaurant. So, or at least that much driving time. So there's no way you could take a lunch hour. But oh my gosh, that was fantastic. I wish somebody would cook me lunch every day like that. Anyhow, sorry, go ahead.
Now, back to GTV. I want to share a photo from that collaborative effort that was called GTV.
Oh yeah, that's the team. These were wonderful, wonderful people. There's David Lawrence is right behind the guy in the red shirt who's Noah Falstein. I'm right in the middle. There's David. In the middle, there's Doug Crockford, who many of you might know as the founder of JSON, the JavaScript notation system. One of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And everybody in that. Oh, who's lying down? Oh, that's oh God, my brain's going. She worked for National Geographic, and if I don't remember her name, it's going to really hurt me. Turner Houston, and so Steve Arnold's in there, who is on the left. Just behind the child there. He was the head of the games division and the one who hired us. But yeah, GTV was an amazing experience. I don't know if you found it, but there is a demo movie out there too of GTV that if you want, you can put in the links for this. That was sort of what we showed off, trying to get more funding for it at one point.
So this is 3301 Kerner Boulevard?
I bet it is. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had pretty long hair at the... Oh, wait. What's there now?
So this is 3301 Kerner Boulevard over here.
Yep. Can we find where the photo was taken, or is that gone? I have no idea.
So
it's probably
gone because Eric Woolwander told me that this place was remodeled, renovated, whatever. But this place is very similar. You see
there it is.
I'm not sure if it's exactly this place, because in the photo you can see the house behind you guys.
The photo
you can see.
Oh yeah, there's something handyman or something man back there store.
So
yeah. It was a while ago, so I'm guessing things have changed.
Okay. But this is 3301 Kerner Boulevard.
Yeah. Those days are a bit of a blur, the GTV days. They very soon, that was probably, the photos probably taken very soon after we started working on the project, because we moved out to Skywalker just a couple months after the beginning there, which was quite a big change from being in a industrial park to being in kind of a working paradise. In a way, it's hard to overstate how lovely it was to work at Skywalker Ranch. Just the rolling hills. We had mountain lions wandering outside the window, snakes. Yeah, there were those. But yeah, it's a very easy place to be creative because you're just surrounded by beauty.
And why was the GTV project canceled?
Well, it actually came to fruition. They did make it. It was a very small scale rollout. I think one of the things that killed it was video disc, the equipment to run it, the video disc player, the computer, everything was very expensive, too expensive for schools to afford. And very soon after we started, there's this new technology in town called CD-ROMs. And boy, they kind of did everything that the video disc did, but it was on this little drive that connected to a computer, and you didn't need, $6,000 worth of external equipment to have it happen. So I think that was a lot of the reason for the demise. But the technology we built was fun. It was for the time, it was groundbreaking. And the project, I think, inspired some educational projects thereafter, both that National Geographic did and that Apple got into. But Lucas, their education division did a couple other things, but sort of tailed off. Though there is the Lucas Learning, what do they call it? I can't remember. That became a whole offshoot of Lucasfilm that David Lawrence worked for a long time. I moved more into the game side for a while, but he kept wanting to educate people. Crazy.
Okay, so in 1988, you got your first game credit, or should I say credits. You were credited on sound, music, writing, dialogue, and story on Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders. When were you first approached about the project?
Well, interestingly, I was not credited on Maniac Mansion, though I did a lot of grunt work on that game. So I did most of the what they call room boxing for Maniac Mansion, which was where I would sit and Gary Winnick would draw these backgrounds, and then I would take them and I'd draw rectangles around where the floors were. so the characters knew where to walk. And it was rectangles, parallelograms. That's what I did on Maniac Mansion. I don't know why they didn't give me a credit for that, but I spent way too many hours sitting and dragging lines around those screens. And then I actually believe I quit Lucasfilm. I was just that was a frustrating project after GTV, which was very exciting. Now, they're like, they don't know what to do with me. And so they have me drawing boxes. I quit. I was living in Sebastopol, this beautiful little town about an hour north of San Francisco. Had a teeny cabin out in an apple orchard. They didn't pay me a lot for doing GTV, but I was working so much, I didn't have time to spend anything. So I had all this money saved up. I paid the rent for a year on this cabin. I had my synthesizers, and I just quit and decided I'm just going to sit in this cabin and play music. And at the same time, my wonderful grandfather, Popsy, who got me the computer, I asked him again to help me out, and he bought me a piano, which I still have to this day. I decided I wanted to get back into just playing a real instrument. And so, that piano is still with me. It's traveled to New York and back here as I moved there and back. And it's my baby. But I had been probably, 3 or 4 months after I quit Lucas. I'm starting to run a little low on money. And so I decide, well, I need to get, some job just to at least feed myself. And so I'm in Sebastopol. I applied at Domino's Pizza, which they wouldn't hire me because I had beard. They told me, and long hair. They told me to be a pizza delivery driver, I had to look different than a pizza delivery driver should look. I mean, so I wasn't going to shave my beard or cut my hair. I tried the video store in town in Sebastopol to hire me. They looked at my resume, which all it said was Lucasfilm, and they said, you're just going to get bored and quit. So they wouldn't hire me. And I realized my only hope was to go back to Lucasfilm because nobody else seemed to want me. And coincidentally, I got a call from them around this time, and they said, we have a new game coming up, and we'd like you to come in and chat about it. And David Fox, who I had known and worked with a little bit because he was deep into Maniac Mansion, he was looking for somebody to help him develop this game he had designed called Ancient Astronauts as its working title. And so in I went. And it's a little vague in my memory what really happened, but I know we sat down and chatted about it, and I was like, well, I guess it's a job, and I need a job, and we'll see how it goes. It turned out to be actually one of my favorite things I've ever done. The collaboration between David and I has turned into a lifelong friendship. We really just worked well together. We balanced each other. I think my initial role was sort of as his assistant, and there was no question we became partners. I mean, he was directing the project, but there was too much of it for him to make all the decisions. So I was, given the responsibility for a lot of the game decisions. And we talked through pretty much everything that was of import, but I was off on my own doing stuff, and he was off on his own doing stuff, and then we'd see how they merged together. But David and I working on that game was a pure joy. Even though it was long hours, he was married to Annie, who he still is, so he had to go home eventually, but I was single for most of it until Leslie, who is a character in the game, came into my life. But I did not have to get home at any time, so I rarely left. It was great.
Now, this game is the second game to utilize the SCUM engine, and apparently you worked on the first one as well. So what specific modifications were made to adapt the engine for the gameplay requirements of this project?
You probably have to talk to Ron about that, and Ron Gilbert, though I'm sure he doesn't need a last name. Also, in those top smartest people I've ever worked with, and a total joy. He's a character. He's has this grumpy gamer, exterior ID. That was his old website. I don't know if it's even still running, but he is just full of heart and just a pleasure. He did some modifications, mostly working with David to develop things. I don't know if I can speak to what he really did. The thing I loved about Scum, though, is writing it. I'd been writing assembler before, and talk about getting far away from the way your brain normally works. You're trying to talk in the language a computer understands. And coming from an art background, I wanted to be, more creative, but you're constantly down in the bits and bytes. With Scum, it was like writing prose. It's just amazing. As a matter of fact, I used to joke that, not even joke, it was real. I would take home printouts that I'd be working on, and Leslie would be able to read it like a script and get the jokes right. I mean, you can't imagine somebody who knows nothing about programming being able to look at code and follow it, because the Scum is really like writing a screenplay, is what it was. So you felt more like you were creating a film than you were writing a game. And so that was just so much fun. I later on in my life, I worked with lots of other languages, C++ and Forth, and, nothing's like Scum. It's just, I wish I could write everything in that, even still. It's fun to write in. Hats off to Ron for creating that.
Now, speaking of Ron, you also had a brainstorming session with Ron that influenced the tone and direction of the game's plot. What can you share about that session?
Yeah, dramatically. I mean, David envisioned this originally as a very sort of serious game. It was going to be, looking at this idea that we had been visited by aliens, and how did that, play out in sort of this dramatic fashion. And Ron, who has one of the most irreverent senses of humor of anyone I've ever met, he just was worried about the fun level. I mean, funativity is, I think, a word. I don't think he coined it, but he used it. And I remember this was very early on in our meetings about the game, where we were sort of just mapping out what was going to happen. And Ron was just concerned, and I think we all were a little concerned, that it's just not going to be fun. Maniac Mansion was Maniac. It had these crazy things going on. I mean, this, meteor who is sentient, and things that just didn't make sense, but created this really unique, fun world. And he convinced us, and, I was very easily convinced. David took a little more time, but he definitely came around too, that we needed to sort of have fun with it. And if we were having fun and created a fun environment, that people would play it and have fun and enjoy it. Neither David and I are comedy writers. We could do a few stupid jokes here and there, but we actually, at some point during the project, hired an actual comedy writer to do a lot of the one-liners that are in the game, that we would then incorporate. The plot points, though, was mostly David and I fighting them out, and coming up with, how is this going to work? He had a map drawn up for the original game, and we stuck to a lot of that, but we added, humorous elements throughout it. And, I think it made it for a much better game. I think it made it, you got this idea of these aliens, but, there's Elvis, right? So it really brought in this whole different sense to it. And I think that's part of the reason it's had the appeal for so long that it has, it's funny. And it's fun. And even playing it with my daughter when she was 6, which was now a long time ago, or my partner's daughter recently when she was like 7 or 8, she's now 10, they laugh. And to be engaged, that's part of any story, is, some sort of humor. So I'm really glad we went that direction.
They laughed, and then they got to the mazes and
they cried. Yeah. Well, the mazes are yeah, I'm sorry to everybody for the mazes. It was, part of it in our original thinking was these are interesting puzzles, and we hoped there were enough clues in the mazes to help you figure them out, but they were hard. And it's, we had play testers, but they, if they had us to give them hints. And part of it, maybe a little bit, was also that selling hint books was part of the marketing plan. And so you could find out how to get through those mazes if you paid $10 for your hint book, which was, I believe I'm correct, is more than Lucas made on selling a copy of the game. Was because it was pretty much pure profit. They didn't have to share with anyone for the hint books. So that's definitely part of the marketing scheme.
And people who pirated Zak McKracken also had to get hint books.
Exactly. So everyone needed a hint book, right? And we created it in a way you couldn't copy it because you needed the little red, film to look at it. We had that stupid copy protection printed on that dark maroon paper in black, so hopefully you couldn't photocopy that. There was some hoops people had to jump through. And there's some of the mazes, like the jungle maze, right? Of course, that one isn't really a maze, but it frustrated a lot of people. You just had to go through a certain number of random doors and you found your way up. Other mazes like the Mayan temple, man, that's hard. And when I've played it again, I get frustrated with it. So you're not alone. Maybe
you should talk to the game designers.
I have talked to them, and if we could go back and cut those mazes out, when they did that re-release last year, I'm like, can we fix it before you do this? Because you're going to just frustrate a whole new generation.
So how did you and David divide the work for scripting and programming in the game?
It was pretty much just split up. It's funny. I listened to his interview. I think we have merged some of our memories. I know. I thought I came up with Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders, the name, but I know we looked in the phone book for some of it, and but he thinks he came up with it. I pretty sure I did. One of the big things I did was, because I did the soundtrack for it, so I'm pretty sure I did the initial opening sequence on the Commodore 64 version, and did all the programming of that. That was quite an effort getting it all timed to the music. And by the way, only the C64 version works perfectly with the music. Every other version, I never was happy with it. And I didn't work on any of the other versions. But after that, I think it was just sort of a divide and conquer thing. We had rooms we had to go to, and by rooms I mean locations, but we still called them rooms after Maniac Mansion. And we both did all the wiring and coding that it would demand. I also did most of the sound. I did more than half the sound effects. Chris Grigg, who did some work for Lucasfilm, he was in this band, fairly famous band called Negative Land. He did some of the sound effects for the game. Somehow he is also on a lot of game sites, gets credit for the music. Sorry, Chris, but that was all me. I don't, the credits get a little mixed up over time. But I did all the music for the game and a lot of the sound. So David did probably, the bulk of the programming for the gameplay, because I was busy doing these other things, but I did a lot of that as well. And so it was fairly even. I mean, David was the director, and there's no question. I mean, if he didn't like something that I did, it would come out. But I don't think there were very many instances of that. I think for the most part, we, had a really similar, vision of how the game needed to happen. But one of the things that I've always felt in the best partnerships, and this is with, both David Fox and David Lawrence, who I did Mozilla with, and every other partner I've had over the years, is having somebody around to tell you when you're doing something stupid is invaluable. Because you get in these projects, you get so deep into them. that you lose sight, and something you think is funny or clever, and somebody else comes in and goes, "You're wrong." And having somebody you can be honest with like that is, to me, the most valuable kind of partner. There's one of the great examples from this time period, actually, is the Amiga computer, which I think the story was the operating system was written by a single guy up in his mountain house in Santa Cruz. And I don't know how true this was, but man, that thing sucked. In terms of working on the Amiga, you would get these guru meditation errors with these huge long hex numbers several times a day. And it just would crash. You're supposed to write down the number and do what with it? Who knows? But it was a singular vision. And it was amazing. What he was trying to do was incredible. But I don't think anybody was sitting next to him and saying, let's try it another way. And I've always really appreciated that. A collaborator who can brutally be honest with me and keep me from doing stupid shit. Oh, can I say shit on this? I don't know.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
I expect you to drop a few F-bombs.
I'll work on that. I know my partner's daughter, Lily, will only appreciate it if I do that. So I'll try to work one in.
Okay, let's talk about the game's awesome music for a bit.
Oh,
I remember that I took my tape recorder and recorded a tape of just the Zak McKracken theme over and over again.
Oh my gosh.
I recorded it and then I restarted the game, recorded it again. And so I had a 60-minute tape of just the Zak McKracken theme. Yeah.
Daniel.
Yeah, on both sides. It was...
Well...
That was my mixtape.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I am a little blown away by that. I thought I was the only one who listened to it over and over and over, which when I was working on it, I probably heard it 1,000 times. I was pretty happy with that little ditty. It was the third shot I had with, I think we talked about this a little when we were playing Zak. Went home. David wanted this theme for the game, and I wish I had the ones I did before that. Unfortunately, all those 4-track tapes are gone. But two kind of times I came in with something, and David was just like, "No, that's not it." And then I came in with this one, and he was, print it, done it. It's good, And it was, that was the one I did on my home studio, and then converting that into the Commodore 64 version, which somehow was almost as good. I mean, even compared to these really high-end synthesizers for the time, I love the C64 version. And then, of course, there was the IBM PC version, which is horrible. And
I told you that the IBM PC version is the version I played as a kid. So
no, that's the one you recorded?
Yeah.
Oh, Daniel, I am so sorry. I thought you were at least the 6. Oh my gosh. That was nothing but, that's a square wave, beeps and boops. All right. Yeah. I will send you a 60-minute mixtape of the original version. No need to do that anymore. And it's wonderful. It holds up. I mean, it has that sort of 80s video game sound to it, but it's, even our 10-year-old now, she loves it. I mean, she will play it over and over in the car when I'm taking her to school. So here we are, blah, 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 years later, and somehow the little piece of music holds up. So
yeah, it's badass. It's got all the best parts of 80s music. It's ominous and upbeat. Usually it's one of the two.
Yeah, it's got
this one has both of them.
Cool drum fills in it. I know one of my favorite, it's been covered, I think, like 30 or 40 times that I've found out there. One of my favorites is this guy on YouTube who takes game music and just plays drums along with it. And he does an amazing job with that one. I've been surprised how much, love that piece of music has gotten. I've written a lot of music besides that, but nobody cares.
We care. First of all, we care.
Oh, you care. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And how did you approach composing music within the Commodore 64's SID cheap constraints.
Yeah. I mean, I did all the composition actually on, I had the Juno 106 we talked about earlier, I had a Yamaha DX7 and this little Yamaha RX11 drum machine. That's where I did my composing, was in my home studio, because, the SID chip was, it's great, but I didn't have tools that I could actually work with. I had this piece of software, a sequencer from Mark of the Unicorn running on a Mac at those days. And so I could sit there and run through all sorts of ideas and mix, different tracks and try all sorts of things that I didn't have a way to do on the SID chip. So all the music for Zak McKracken was done in my home studio. And then I'd come and sit at work at the C64 and try to duplicate what I had done to the best of my ability. And so, it was not a compositional tool, but it was the output for that. And it's for the time, it was amazing. Compared to the Apple II or the IBM PC, which had these basically a square wave generator is all you had. So it was made to go beep, and you could write some music. I did create a tune, as we talked about earlier, which is beep, 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 beep. But, nothing much more than that.
And was there a specific moment during development when you thought this game is really, coming together?
I think David and I were so close to it that, and rushed. We had a deadline that I don't know that we ever relaxed and felt it was coming together. I think so. It was initially supposed to fit on a single disc, as everyone knows and suffered through. It ended up on 2 floppies. And boy, flipping the floppies was a real drag as part of playing it. But that, was a huge cost increase. And there was a lot of discussion about, oh my gosh, this is going to increase the cost of the game. We were getting a lot of pressure from the management to deliver. We were running past our deadlines. So I think David and I were just sort of working hard. And didn't really step back from it and even think it was, what it was. We were too deep in it. The last month, 6 weeks of the game, I was sleeping a lot at Skywalker. There was a couch upstairs from my office. There was a shower there, which was great. They made it so you didn't have to ever leave. And David, still married, still had to go home most nights. But I was there pulling very, very late nights, trying to code and make sound effects and put it together. And then we would have to run these builds before you'd write the code, and you couldn't test it. You had to compile. And so there was all this time lag. So you do, fix a bug, compile, test, fix a bug, compile, test. And I still basically write like that. I like to, there's people who are coders who are like, oh, I got 12 bugs. Let me fix them and then see where I am. I've always been fix one, get that one locked down, move on to the next. I'm very, very, focused on sequence. But yeah, I don't know that there was a time until we felt like after it was released and seeing it translated into other languages and getting this tremendous feedback is really where we finally went, oh, we created something pretty cool.
And was HR okay with the fact that you slept in the office?
I don't know how much they knew. It's, I think, a tradition, especially then in the game industry and in all software, that programmers just work pretty much 24/7. And you leave them alone, you feed them a lot of caffeine, and you get out of their way. And pizza, caffeine and pizza. We had plenty of pizza that, we were far away, but the bosses would bring in big pizza, so we didn't have to leave. I remember going into lunch and taking a to-go with me so that I would just have something for dinner. Oh, there's my dog barking in the distance. But yeah, I don't think HR cared. I know my boss didn't care. He wanted the game shipped, so they could start selling it rather than just paying for it. Yeah.
Now, you've worked on several aspects of the game: design, programming, music. Which of these roles felt most natural to you during the production of this game?
Oh, interesting. I think it's the intersection of music and programming. To me, those are kind of two sides of the same thing I do. Programming is a kind of logical, progression of thought, and so is music, right? It's having an idea and expressing it, and so for me, those two have been intermingled my whole career. I love programming. Something I love about programming is this constant feedback loop of little problem, solve it, success. And it's like little endorphin rush all the time. It's constant when you're coding is, oh, great. I have this new challenge. Oh, there's the solution. Great. Now we move on to the next one. And, music is, especially the way I play it now, which is almost all improv, is, a lot less structured, but it has a similar feedback loop, right? You have this when I'm playing with other people, you create these rhythms, these melodies, and when they roll back into each other, there's this little, oh, we did it. We found a way to communicate and create something that's very, very, satisfying. And so, I love doing them both. I mean, nobody's paid me to do music in a long time. But I still get paid to write code. So and that's a little bit by choice. I haven't really looked for work writing music, but I still write a lot. I write mostly for the piano, not for synths anymore. But it's really sort of my joy. And it's a way to defocus from looking at a screen too, which I still spend way too much time doing.
Well, if they ever make a Zak McKracken remaster, they should hire you to work on the remastered version of the theme song.
I would love to do that. I do play the Zak theme on the piano, but nobody can recognize it because I then go off on my improv and it just becomes a whole different thing.
You're not playing it to the right people.
I know they might get it. It always starts with a da 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 dum, and yeah, that's going to be my theme song, I guess, whether I like it or not.
Now, you spoke highly of the Commodore 64 version of Zak McKracken,
right?
And you called it the definitive version.
Absolutely.
What specific aspects of it, apart from the music, stand out to you compared to ports like the FM Towns version or the Amiga version?
Well, the FM Towns version artistically is gorgeous. I mean, there's just this whole different feel to it. And the sound is great on the Towns too. Nobody, I don't think, in this country played it. I mean, so I only saw it once on the Towns, so I didn't even get to play it. The Amiga version, I think we did an Atari ST version too. Zozo's actually Eric, who you spoke with, he handled most of the translations in different versions of those, I believe. I know he did the IBM PC. I don't know if he did the other ones. I think the Towns was maybe outsourced. The problem is with all of those versions, the whole idea with a port is just get it moved over and get it working. On the Commodore 64 version, David and I, all we thought about was get it right. I mean, and that was part of the reason it took so long and why we were getting in trouble with management is both of us are perfectionists and every pixel in there, we wanted to be correct. And, it was a labor of love from start to finish for the C64 version. Okay, the last couple of weeks might have been a little rushed because we were under a lot of pressure, but David and I spent countless hours polishing, redoing, rewriting, and having Gary redo drawings and Martin redo things. He was the other artist who worked on it. Just we wanted everything perfect. And when you're doing a translation, especially if you're an outside company, you're being paid to do a job and get it out there. And so they don't have the love, it's like, what's the difference between, making dinner at home or popping something in the microwave you buy in the freezer, right? It may call it the same thing as what you made, but when I'm cooking, every aspect of it I care about. When, whatever the TV dinner company is doing, they're just, machines are building it. And so I think that's the real difference. The C64 version, it was crafted with love. And I hope it shows still that we really cared about it.
It does show. And it's almost perfect, because during our last live stream, we ran into what seemed to be a 36-year-old game-breaking bug in that specific version.
Amazing.
And he couldn't pick up the yellow crystal shard in the Mexican temple.
Amazing.
Now, it appears that the issue was caused by a script that skipped the pickup command when playing as Annie.
Right.
I saw the code.
Oh my gosh.
So apparently this bug also affected the DOS, the first version of the DOS build, and was later patched in DOS version 2 and FM Towns. So Robert Migan, who was in the chat during the live stream, actually issued a fix for ScumVM, and Martin Wendt, who was also in the chat at the time, even made a patch for the C64 disk images.
Isn't that incredible? It's just, it blows my mind. It totally blows my mind. First of all, the bug got in, right? And I mean, David and I are at fault, but we had playtesters. They just missed one, right? So we can blame them.
And you married one of them.
No, I didn't marry her. We were just a couple, so we never got married. Leslie and I, and we're still friends all these years later. And nobody called it out to us. But the fact that people care enough now to figure out how to fix it, that's crazy. And wonderful.
Well, it's about time they fixed this bug.
I know.
36 years.
If only we had bug bounties and we could pay you guys to find more bugs. I'm sure there's more that would show up.
I'm sure that's Lucasfilm Games' highest priority at the moment.
No
to
question.
Find bugs in Zak McKracken.
Oh, yeah. It'll be interesting. I would love them to do a newer version of it. We'll see what happens. I mean, part of it is also watching even the difference between when I played with my daughter, who's now in her early 20s, when she was 6 years old. We played through most of the game and it held her attention. But now my partner's daughter, who's now 10, got through a little bit, and she's so used to what games and media are now that it's harder to hold attention. So, that style of game, it's a rare person now that has the patience for it, I think, because you really have to sit with it. Take your time. You have to think. You have to be willing to have nothing going on for a little while you try things. And there's certain people who love that. But boy, the game she plays now, it's like so rapid fire. It can't compete.
So when did you leave LucasArts? And what was the last project you worked on there?
Well, my last project that I worked on there was actually not credited with my own name because I was embarrassed by it. I did the sound effects for Noah's game. Was it Battlehawks 1942? Is that what it's called? I'm pretty much a pacifist, and to work on a war game was sort of antithesis to my sense of self, but I needed the money, and they offered me a job doing the sound effects for the game. And so I took it, but it's credited with a made up pseudonym I used called
Waldo
Kagan. Yeah.
That's you.
That's me. Waldo was my father's middle name, and Kagan was my family's original name from Ukraine before we came over to the U.S. and were dubbed the Kanes, a nice Irish name rather than an Ashkenazi name. So it's Waldo Kagan is me. I got game credits out there under that name, which is pretty strange.
You got just that one.
I think that's the only one. I used that name. I had used that name for years when I had done other work where I just, I don't want to put my own name on this. And so, but that's, I think, the one that's out there. And I was, hanging out at Lucasfilm waiting for my next project. And I went to a party in Berkeley. With a friend of mine. Actually, I think David Lawrence was there. He and I are still friends to this day. And we had gone to this party, and this has got to be 1987, 1988. Thank you. I'm glad you know when the dates get confused in your brain. And I met this guy. And we started talking, and he was just fascinating. His name was Chris Saltmarsh, and he was working on a little project called the Superconducting Super Collider. And he was a physicist, and I had, never really sat down and talked to a physicist before. And we started talking maybe at 9, 10 o'clock at this party, and we talked until dawn. And we sat in the backyard of this house. Everybody had left, and we just connected. And he was explaining high energy physics to me, and I was getting it as well as I could. And he, by the end of the conversation, knowing I had done game development, he offered me a job at 4 times the salary I was making at Lucasfilm, writing the software interface for the Super Collider. And so it was pretty good offer. I quit at Lucasfilm and went to work at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and ended up developing a C++ toolkit for building software interfaces to run the control software for the Super Collider. In some ways, a totally different kind of job, but he saw it as, how do we make running this giant Super Collider, this huge machine, like a game? How do we make it fun? And, I hate the word intuitive, because I actually don't believe any sort of software interface is intuitive. None of us are born knowing how to, click a mouse on something, but make it quickly learnable and logical. And some of the things we came up with, which seem very commonplace now, but didn't happen at all in software at that point, was rollover states. This is in 1988. Where even on the Mac, when you rolled over a button, it didn't change, right? There was no feedback from the interface telling you, oh, my cursor is in a button. And so everything in this system we built was, hot and just had immediate feedback from the interface that, oh, if I click now, this will happen. Because you're in a high pressure environment. These physicists are working, the cost to run this machine is millions of dollars a day. So you're paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour to run experiments. So everything had to be this great feedback loop. And so it was a really wonderful challenge. It was, I loved doing it. And it fed right out of sort of this game world. Game design is, how do you make something that can engage people? In this case, it was just, a few dozen people rather than, however many thousands got to play Zak McKracken. But they seemed to be doing really important work. And that's lured me away from Lucasfilm. And the 4 times the salary wasn't so bad either.
And how did you make the user interface react so fast on late 80s hardware?
Well, we had the hottest computers in the world at that point, which were Sun Spark stations, and they were multiple CPUs, and they were extremely expensive. This was all government money, and there was plenty. And so, I was coming from a world where we were using Lucas. I think we had a PDP 1170 or something was our mainframe. There it was just a very old machine, and then and I moved from that into the world of high energy physics, where they got the latest and greatest of everything. And so we were able to build, and C++, as a matter of fact, when we started using it, was not even a fully defined language. We were using a beta version that hadn't even been released yet, but we knew we had to use some sort of object-oriented language to build this thing so that it was more like a toolkit. We could plop things together. The idea was that a physicist could come up with an idea for a test they wanted to run, and within a day we could build an interface that with all these components that they could hook up to the machine and run the test. The three parts of it were the part I built, which was called Glistic, the graphic library for the integrated scientific toolkit. And then Chris worked on something which was this self-describing data set, so that the data would come with a header, so you always knew what it was, and you could format the data anyway, which is fascinating. And then there was this guy, Vern Paxson, who worked on a language called Glish, I believe it was, that was tied it all together. There was a programming language that we could use to build all this stuff. And the three of us, once again, late hours. And there was this sort of idea that if you were writing code, you didn't sleep, and you were just caffeine fueled and going all the time. But I was living at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories. Luckily, I found a piano in one of their old auditoriums that I could go, decompress for a little while before I had to go back to work. But programming all day and night and creating this set of tools that then, unfortunately, they were put into use other places, but the Super Collider was canceled. Several years into its development, the Integrated Scientific Toolkit got a life at CERN in Switzerland, and also Fermilab outside of Chicago, where they used some of the elements of this to create control software. But the main project was destroyed or not destroyed. It was partially built. They dug a big hole, 53-mile hole in Texas to put it in, but then never actually put it in. And the last I heard, they're storing potatoes there. So if you like potatoes, you can thank high energy physics failures.
Wow, using a beta version of C++ is like, James Cameron using a beta version of Photoshop to create the abyss.
It was. I mean, it was buggy and problematic, but it was also, object-oriented programming was brand new. It took me a few weeks to get my head around it. I mean, it was all linear before that. It was all, you could draw a line how your program is going to run, and build flowcharts and work out logic that way. And all of a sudden, you have multiple things running in different ways, and you just set them off, and you can clock them together like Legos in different other ways. And it was wonderful. It was once I got it, it just made perfect sense. And for something like that, it was great.
So you were there until the early 90s. In 1991, You started working as a programmer at Carnegie Mellon University's Robotics Institute, where you designed Emily, a speech recognition-based reading assistant for children. Can you describe the overall architecture of Emily and how its various components interacted with each other?
Sure. Actually, back up a little bit. I did not go to Carnegie Mellon to work. I went to do grad school, which, if I'm 100% honest, I went to meet women because I had been programming in these geeky environments since I graduated from, got my bachelor's. And there are not a lot of women at Lucasfilm then, especially in the games division. At the Super Collider, there was 150 physicists and me, and I think one of the physicists was female. I was getting close to my 30s, and like, well, the only place I know where to meet girls is school, so I'm going to go to grad school. And that was sort of my decision process. I didn't think I actually needed a graduate degree, especially in programming. Nobody cared I had a bachelor's, and nobody ever asked me about what I did in school. It was, can you do the work? Excuse me. And it was, but it seemed like a great place to, I'm not a hang out in bars and meet people person, so I'm going to school. So I enrolled in the art department at Carnegie Mellon. I created a special major between art and computer science there, which is now turned into actually part of the curriculum. I was the first one to do that there. I had Brian Rogers, who had been my advisor and mentor in my undergrad, had gone to Carnegie Mellon and was heading up the art department. And so I went to sort of work with him, and we set up this sort of interdisciplinary study program. But unlike all the other grad students at Carnegie Mellon who were given a stipend and no tuition, because I was associated with the art department and Carnegie Mellon considers itself a technical school, we had to pay full tuition and no stipend. So it was a 3-year program, and sometime in the second year, I ran out of money, and I just couldn't afford to be in school anymore. So I applied for a job in the robotics division. They were looking for programmers, and I pretty much dropped out of grad school and went to work coding. And the project we were working on, there was a guy who was heading up the project named Jack Mostow, and he's still there, I believe. This was the early 90s and the very early days of speech recognition. And so he had this idea that you could use speech recognition to help kids learn to read by listening to them read and gently interacting with them. You could be like a reading coach. And it was, I think, a brilliant idea. And I don't know that it's ever really been fully developed, but we built a prototype of it. And we were using Next computers because Steve Jobs and Next had donated, 100 of their black cubes to Carnegie Mellon, and they didn't really know what to do with them. So we were using those to code on. And then the system, the speech recognition part of it, ran on an Apollo that was a $500,000 piece of hardware that we had, because the processing necessary to do speech recognition at that time, I mean, it blows me away to have Siri on my phone, right? I mean, just how does that happen? But in order to do it then, it was this incredible computing power. And while I was building the project, we were prototyping it, and testing it on kids in schools. And I would take this cart loaded with more than $500,000 of computer equipment, put it in my car, drive out to the schools, and push it into a first grade classroom and sit in a corner and test it with kids, nervously moving this equipment around. It was kind of crazy. But it was, it was a great project. We actually, I think, won best paper at the AAAI conference in 1992 or something like that. People thought, this is the future of artificial intelligence and speech recognition. So we were really on the cusp of that. It was a great project to work on. And I did that for like 3 years, 2.5, 3 years while I was there, before moving off to New York.
And I asked you to describe the overall architecture of Emily and how its various components interacted with each other.
Yeah, let's see what I can remember. I mean, you had this Apollo computer that was running the speech recognition. You had a Next computer that was running the interface. There was a video camera that was, and a mic hooked up to film the kids while they read. We created an animated character that was sort of the avatar that would correct them, because you want to be very gentle. And I mean, the biggest trick, of course, with the speech recognition was getting it to be close to real time. So you can hear when a kid is making a mistake and gently try to help them through when they're struggling on a word. They're sitting there trying to sound something out. And you want to give them a chance, but you don't want to let them get frustrated. So that balance was a lot of it. I don't know. Yeah. So that's not really the architecture, but that's what I can remember about how the system worked.
And was it able to detect grammar mistakes or pronunciation mistakes?
They would be reading us from words on the screen. So it knew what it expected to hear from them. And it was mostly pronunciation, or when they didn't know a word, it would help them sound out the word. One of the things I learned actually on the Super Collider that I still don't understand why software isn't like this now is how to get someone's attention without annoying them. Alert sounds are mostly horrible, right? They're like, and there's a buzz, or there's something that just jolts your brain, and you have this, second of like annoyance before you pay attention. When we were developing the Super Collider, we found I was thinking about how when you have an important moment where you need the scientist to pay attention to the screen or do something, how do you get their attention? Do you sound an alarm, or do you just go, and it turned out that it's amazing that just a little throat clear is exactly the right thing. People turn to look at it. It's like, oh, somebody wants my attention. So became that. And then we also found all those little pauses you do, like, are much more effective as gently pulling somebody's attention. So Emily used that to like stop the kid. It would go, and the kid would stop what they're doing. And then you go, let's sound that out. And whatever the word was. And then it would say, the first part sounds like, and tell them, and then please repeat that. And then they'd say it, and you'd see if they got it right. So it was that sort of back and forth interaction. But you don't want it to go beep, and then you feel like you've lost, or you're slightly traumatized. But yeah, the throat clear, gosh, I don't know why it's not all like that, or some gentle way to pull your attention in.
It would have really helped me in DOS interfaces whenever I'd write format C. Then,
yes,
the PC speaker could have.
You're right.
Could have done a throat clear on the PC speaker.
That's
for
exactly
me to know that it's wrong.
You messed it up again.
So in 1995, you founded Lama Media, where you served as a technical director for 19 years, designing and programming websites, games, and applications back in 1995.
Yeah, well, that was my ex-wife and I started the company together. She was a graphic designer and an artist. And we originally started working, strangely enough, on another project for National Geographic, is where we first got our start. There was a program, I still had connections to them, and there was a program they were doing called Geography Bee. They have like a spelling bee, they have a geography bee, where instead of spelling words, you answer questions about geography, and they wanted to make a computer version of that. And this guy, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Carnegie Mellon at this time, and this guy was starting a company, and that was going to be the first project. And so my ex and I went to work for him, working on that. That turned out to be a bit of a shit show. There was problems with him, and the trust level dropped pretty quickly. But my ex and I realized that we were a good team. She was a great artist, and I was a pretty good programmer. And so we decided to, put our skills together and see what we could do. So we worked on, a couple other games and other projects for the next many years. One we did for Simon & Schuster. Actually, just before that, one of the big projects we worked on was called SPQR, which was this these two professors at Columbia had built a 3D model of the Roman Forum. And they did it they were architecture professors, and they did it because, like, oh, look, we can do this. And maybe that was 1997 or something like that. Thank you. I'm close. I'm very close. And so they built this model of the Roman Forum, and they were approached by, I can't remember the name of this company, and said, oh, turn this into the game. Here's $2 million. These guys know nothing about gaming. And this is the era, I think Myst had come out. So CD-ROM games were just, coming out into the market, and Myst was a huge success with these sort of unreal worlds it created, but they had an actual real world that they had modeled. Now they wanted to somehow shove a game into it. And so they put together a team that included my ex and myself, and she did all the artwork and animations, and I did all the coding, or a good hunk of the coding. There were a couple other programmers on the project too. It was pretty much a flop when it came out because it took a lot of computer power to run this world, and the game, there was no overarching designer on how do you make this fun. We had no Ron Gilbert saying, crank up the fun button or fun level. So, it was okay, but it was, an interesting project. It led to one of my lifelong fascinations with spinning tops, because I had to create in the game a top that you could spin on the computer. That was part of one of the things that was part of the gameplay. And somehow that turned into years of everybody giving me tops. I mean, I think if people know you're into something, they know what to buy you. And so I still have a collection of about 200 or 300 spinning tops. Then we were approached by Simon & Schuster and did this silly game called Millennium Mantra that was released around the millennium, that was supposed to be a meditative game to get you into this very relaxed mindset. The coolest thing about that game, in a way, was there was a program in the 90s called Macromedia Director. There was a very popular way to do sort of slideshows and video presentations, and but wasn't thought of a way to do games. And I had created a whole set of tools in it to allow it to do multi-level animations and gaming. And I had showed it off to a few people, and what Simon & Schuster wanted was us to take that and develop this game all in Director for them. And so that was kind of cool. One of the great things about Director, as opposed to most other platforms at the time, is you could generate a Macintosh and Windows version out of the same code, which was rare at this point in time. So we could deliver both platforms effortlessly, and so they were excited by that.
Well, you could have used Macromedia Flash back then.
Flash had just came out near the end of that, but Flash turned out to have a longer life than Director. But Director, in its way, I loved it. Especially with this thing I created called Dance. And Directors, I can't even remember what the acronym stands for, but Dance lets you programmatically create multiple moving objects in Director. It made it a game engine, essentially. And it was great for creating all sorts of things, which you would find very difficult. Director was all this drag and drop interface with this big spreadsheet you would fill out. But that was a horrible way to program. So Dance gave you a way to write code to control everything. Yeah.
Back then, the hottest new thing was to have enhanced CDs. So you'd have the music CDs, and then you have the enhanced CD section that you'd pop the CD into the computer and have a Macromedia Director application that would either play the music, and then you'd have, I remember I had the Aerosmith 9 Lives album.
Right.
And that had something like Guitar Hero, in which it plays the tracks from the album, and then you need to hit the keys accordingly. So you add more chords and more guitar sounds to the original sound. So
you're now in Aerosmith.
Director.
Yeah, Director was great. And for its time, it was incredible. And I extended it way beyond its time. I actually, one of the things my company did was start building websites in '97, which was really kind of the dawn of the web. And a thing I realized very quickly was that if I created a website for a client, they couldn't do any updating. They'd have to come back to me for even the smallest changes. So I built something called, the name of the company was Llama Media, and I built this thing called Llama QC, Llama Quality Control in Director. And it was a precursor of sort of what WordPress does, especially with this things called advanced custom fields, where you create forms to generate HTML. And so this was in 1998, 99, I built this thing. And I would give this program to my clients, and they could pull it up, and they wanted to change something on the website. This would pull it up and put in all the fields they could change just by putting text in, and then it would wrap it all up in all the HTML code and generate a file that then could be uploaded and change the page. So it was a pretty cool program. My clients at the time all thought it was magic. And I definitely thought it was magic because I didn't have to do the grunt work after I delivered a website. It was like, the secretary at the town of Hempstead, my biggest client during that area was the town of Hempstead on Long Island. We did their website for many years, which was a 700 or 800 page website in the early 2000s. And they were able to update everything with this tool. So it was pretty cool.
Wow. So you created dynamic websites in a time in which everyone had static websites.
It was all static, except, we had this thing, and it was all written in Director, which was crazy. But it was, once again, I could deliver a Macintosh and a Windows version of this so that it didn't matter what my client was running on. I could make updates and generate both versions. And it spat out this great HTML code. And this was before CSS. It was before people were using JavaScript on websites. It was just, HTML. But it was pretty cool.
Well played. Wow.
Thanks.
I remember that era, especially with Flash websites after you created Macromedia Director websites, but with Flash websites, I love them so much. I, as a Flash developer, always appreciated when movie studios would create a full screen Flash website for each and every movie that would come out with, you'd have the skip intro button, which eventually led to the demise of Flash because everyone hated Flash because you'd have an intro at the beginning of every time you enter a website, have an intro with music that would play in full volume.
Yeah, it was the heyday of the web, right? It was, the skip button was a huge thing. But I remember originally you couldn't even get through them. You had to wait till they put up enter website, and then you could click on that and get to it.
Yeah, because the entire point of the intro was that it would load the rest of the website in the background. So you'd have to watch the intro and you can't skip it.
Yeah, well, when you're running on a 1200 baud modem, you need something to do in the meantime.
Yep.
Yeah, things have changed just a little bit.
A bit. Now, in 2006, you started working as a web producer at Atari, where you led the creation of a collaborative game-making portal. What were the key logistical challenges you faced while building this platform?
Oh, well, working at Atari was interesting. I was called in, a friend of mine, Alex Rudis, who's another musician here, needed somebody to come in and help him on this project he was on. I was living here in California. Atari was no longer really Atari. They had been bought out 2 or 3 times, and I think at this point they were owned by some German conglomerate. They were headquartered in New York. Really, it was not a great project. It was one of those that I don't think it ever saw the light of day. I think that we, worked on it for a year or so, and then it was trashed. To be honest, my truest memory of that time was flying to New York for one of our get-together sessions, going out with one of the artists on the team to a prefix, ridiculously expensive meal with wine pairings that Atari was paying for. Getting so drunk that I was sick in their very expensive hotel room for the next 3 days and then flew home. So that's sort of my memory of that time. It sort of crashed and burned. I don't know whatever happened to it. I wish I could give you more information, but I don't think Atari was definitely not Atari. Atari was it back when I was growing up. We had the early game consoles, and they were the second gaming machine I ever had. The first gaming console I ever had was, I think, the Fairchild, which nobody's heard of. My parents bought it because I think the first one that came out was Odyssey, and then the Magnavox Odyssey, and then there was this thing called the Fairchild, which had these like stick kind of joysticks, and the games were horrible, but they were cartridges, so you could, you didn't have just one game, you had multiples. And then the Atari came out, and it was like, wow, these are actually fun. My favorite game on the Fairchild, I believe, was something that you had to understand binary numbers and pick the next number in the sequence. This was, talk about geeky. Anyhow, I digress.
In 2012, you joined Design Labs as senior web developer. What can you share about your time there?
Well, not a lot. It was a DARPA project, which is a Defense Department funded project. I, designed software, once again, a toolkit. It's one of my favorite things to do, and this shows with like Llama QC, it shows with Super Collider, with Design. There's also one that you haven't dug up, but back in the late 90s, I worked for Philip Morris, designing these toolkits, things for people to use to build other things. And so what I did in Design, I built a whole bunch of programming kits for building display or tweaking software for a amphibious vehicle. So this was Defense Department was creating this underwater vehicle, and this was software that was going to test all the designs on a computer, so they didn't have to actually build prototypes. And so I was doing the interface part of that. So how do they communicate to the software and tell it how to tweak elements of the design so that they can, what happens if we have this much weight in armor plating? How does that affect its buoyancy or whatever? And so all those elements went in. The company lost its funding about a year and a half or so after I started there. And I was sent home with a MacBook Pro and an Apple Thunderbolt monitor, which, interestingly enough, this was, 14 years ago or something, 13 years ago. I just, through Facebook Marketplace, sold that monitor 2 days ago. So I had been using it up until recently, that same Thunderbolt monitor. Got $100 for it. So I thought that was a win, 10, 12 years of use, but they unceremoniously escorted us all to the door and said, take your computer because there's no money left. And so,
since it was a Defense Department project, did you use your pen name? Waldo Kagan?
I should have, but you found it. So obviously I didn't hide it well enough.
In 2013, you became a web strategist and developer at Meyer Sound Laboratories, where you led the web team and oversaw the company's entire web presence. What can you share about your time there?
I'm still there. So I've been at Meyer Sound. This is the longest job that I've ever held in my life. I've been there now going on, 11 years. So for those who don't know, Meyer Sound is a loudspeaker company. They're headquartered here near me in Berkeley. They've been around for 45 years. They build the best. Some would say unquestionably the best. There's a couple companies out there who might argue, but they build, I think, the best loudspeakers in the world. They're extremely high quality and very expensive. They're not for home use unless you're Mark Zuckerberg, and then you have your home theater outfitted with them. They're used in pretty much every venue in the Bay Area. They're used in like Lincoln Center in New York. There are lots of touring acts tour with our line arrays. They're used every Cirque du Soleil show uses Meyer Sound speakers. And it's actually a wonderful company to work for. I love the product that they make. I love great sound. I mean, most of the people who work there are musicians, so there's a real camaraderie around the people who work there. It's something that is not building Defense Department stuff or causing people to have cancer like Philip Morris. I should mention I had 2 job offers when I took the Philip Morris one. One was for Philip Morris and the other was for Lockheed Martin, designing missile guidance systems. So I chose the one that people could choose to get cancer rather than get blown up, which is not much of a choice. So working at Meyer has been great. The website at meyersound.com. When I started there in 2013, they were still running on a website that they had initially built, most of it starting in 1997, and it had not been upgraded much. It still had GIF headers and footers, and this is there was very little CSS on the site, or it was a conglomeration of lots of technologies and kind of a mess. And so as it was just mostly a marketing site, I rebuilt it in 2017 as a WordPress site, and was able to hand off lots of the content creation to like the marketing team and the PR folks, rather than, it used to have to go through everything funneled through the web guy, which is not a great way to do content because, a lot of us can't spell. So it's I really enjoyed being there. I work with really great people, and they understand work-life balance really well. So I work almost solely from home now, which is great. My partner works from home too. She's an herbalist, so she's here in one room creating herbal medicines. I'm in the other room, working on the website. And we get to have lunch together and take hikes and go on bike rides. And so it's a good life. I'm very happy.
Sounds awesome.
Thanks.
And do you guys have a special playlist that you play in order to test the speakers? I mean, there's always one on Spotify, like the best songs to test your headphones. So
yeah, I don't know that there's a special playlist. They definitely like to play music that pushes the speakers. We have a demo room on site at the company called the Pearson Theater. It's this beautiful little movie theater that we have a lot of our speakers in. They're actually doing a complete rebuild right now of the theater. But I had an experience in there one day that I still can feel when I think about it. We created this speaker called the VLFC, the very low frequency loudspeaker, that is pretty much all subsonic. But boy, can you feel it. And they had us in the room with headphones on, or actually just ear blockers on, and turn this thing up, and we watched the dB meter go up to 145 dB in the room, and you felt like you were going to shake apart. My heart for the next hour after that felt like it was shaking. It was intense. I know Metallica uses these speakers at their performances, and it's just, you can't hear them, but boy, can you feel them. So yeah, that was the scariest day at work. I was like jittery for the rest of the day. It really affects you. But yeah. The thing that Meyer really is concerned with is this like clarity of sound. It's not as much the loudness. It's just this, when you listen to Meyer speakers, you almost don't even think about it because it just sounds right. I've gone to shows in venues around here who don't have Meyer, and within minutes you're like, it sounds horrible. Whereas with a Meyer system, it's just tuned beautifully. It's like, oh, I can hear the musician. I can hear everything that's going on. I hear all the instruments individually and together is a beautiful thing. The symphony here uses them because there's just, they're great. I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like an ad for them, but they make a great product. And I actually am lucky enough to own two of them. I couldn't afford them, but we had company raffles. And so I won a set of their studio monitors. That was about a $10,000, $12,000 set of speakers that I'm very happy to own.
Wow.
So
you and Mark Zuckerberg, you both have these speakers.
He's got a little better system than I do. I think he did the full surround. But
well, maybe it's your next Christmas present.
You never know. They love me there. So, right? Looking at you guys.
Now we get to your last game credit. Do you know what it is?
What is my last game credit? No.
Or now.
What did I do?
Maybe you'll get back to gaming in
I would
a year
love
or two.
to get back to gaming. If anybody out there has some gaming jobs, I miss the funativity.
So in 2015, you were credited as the voice of the pilot
of
Matthew Alan Kane in the fan sequel Zak McKracken Between Time and Space. Let's listen to a snippet of your role as Matthew Alan Kane.
Well, yes, Camilla. We created this game in 1988. Back then, we weren't exactly having dreams, more like we were being guided to do the game. It felt like we were channeling something from outside ourselves. The plot, the characters, and everything else just flowed.
So this is David.
Yeah, it was scary. It was like someone, or something, was writing the story through us, and we just created the game in order to broadcast the message.
Quite amazing to think that it was 18
This is
years
Annie.
ago. You mentioned something during our last break about things that have been happening very recently. Won't you tell us about that?
Well, we've been having these vivid dreams, just like the one Zak had in our game. I thought it was just me, but then I talked with Matt and...
I've been having them too. David, tell her what just happened.
Okay, well, last night I had another intense dream. The aliens from our game were chasing me, just like they were before, wearing the same nose glasses and cowboy hats. But that's not the strange part. This morning my vid phone rang. I answered it and couldn't believe what I saw. Those same guys from my dream. They looked as freaked out as I was, and then they hung up.
I see. Matt, what's your take on this?
Well, I'm not sure. Something's happening. And whatever it is, it's not good. It feels like all this is becoming real. It's like our game was just a warning of the sinister plot that's now unfolding.
Wow. Matthew.
Oh my gosh. So, Daniel, I have never seen that before. I vaguely remember doing it and being asked to do it. We were not together when we recorded it. Annie and David probably were, but I was just given a bunch of lines.
You can hear it into the mics. He's using a mic in an echoey room.
Right.
And you have a professional mic.
Yeah, we probably should have gotten together for that. Wow. Thank you for sharing. That was quite amazing. So the guys who did that, Thomas and his gang from Germany, I believe, built that. A couple years before that, they showed up at my door in Berkeley as fans. It was quite a moment for me. I mean, since doing Zak, amazingly, I have gotten, emails and letters and people sending me bits of game paraphernalia to sign. And it just sort of amazes me that anybody cares. But nobody had ever showed up at the door before and knocked and was like, we came from Germany mostly to meet you and David Fox. Like, what? So coincidentally, that night we were having a birthday party for my daughter, and we invited them in, and they were sort of the hit of the party was these guys who showed up wearing Zak McKracken t-shirts from Germany. So,
wow. The original t-shirts you had at Lucasfilm back then, or
they had created new ones. I still have a couple of those originals, which highest bidder. Yeah.
You know what I say? The most important thing is that they spell your name right, and they didn't.
Oh, did they spell my name wrong in the credits?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they put 2 L's in.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I've never found it, because I Google myself all the time and I haven't found that one. Actually, there's some wrestler named Matthew Kane, so that's generally who comes up, and that's also the reason I started using my middle name early was.
It says Matthew Alan Kane over here, but it's got a typo, so
oh my gosh,
no one will ever find it.
No, I'll reach out to them, see if they can fix that bug.
Yeah. At least it's not a 36-year-old bug.
This is
from decades
ago.
This
is 9 years. That's nothing.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, one final question for me.
Okay.
What are your plans for 2025, and how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
Oh, well, my plans for 2025 are to pretty much keep doing what I'm doing. I still love my work. I like programming. It's something that I have found a creative outlet since day one. There's just this constant satisfaction I get from writing code. Am I concerned that AI is going to steal my job? Yeah. But it's not there yet. And it's not going to put the love into the code. There's no question about that. I plan to keep writing code. I plan to keep playing and writing some music. I am with an amazing partner now, and just having a blast. Spending time together, and having a really fun life. If people want to get in touch with me, they are free to email me. I have Matthew at makane.net is my email address directly. Check out MeyerSound.com if you're into loudspeakers. I'm also, if you go to the contact form and send something to the webmaster there, that'll come straight to me too. Let's see, other plans, just really enjoy myself, the days, being with people I love, taking my dog on walks, making good music, and trying to cause as little harm as possible. So.
Wow. 2025 sounds awesome.
If it's as good as
that way.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I feel very blessed. Wonderful friends, new friends like you, Daniel, who it's been great to make your acquaintance over these past year or so. Thank you for including me in the Zak playthroughs. That's been a lot of fun. Old friends like David Fox and David Lawrence, who have been around since forever, in the Lucasfilm days, and I'm very lucky.
Well, Matthew, it's been a pleasure as always, and I truly hope that we'll get to finish Zak McKracken together in the coming months. Hopefully, we won't run into any new bugs. Because,
we do. I hope we do, because somebody out there will fix them. Somebody out there is going to find purpose in fixing these things that have been sitting around even undiscovered. It's like treasure, right?
Yeah, usually, when it comes to live streams, then we get tons of views on the first live stream, and then the numbers decline a bit because people lose interest. But with this specific live stream, we got more views on the third live stream because of the bug. So maybe we need to find more bugs.
More bugs. We'll call it Zak McKracken Bug Hunters, and we'll. That will be our goal, is to break the game. And that's what the playtesters were supposed to do, right? The idea is to break it.
And there were 4 of them. I don't know what they did back then.
I'm going to write some letters. We'll find out. But
thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a real pleasure hanging out with you.